countered, as we've talked about, with Nick Swisher's 211 and Santana's 169. You hit June, all of a sudden you get Chisenhall, Brantley, and Santana now going at the same time. Meanwhile, Murphy's down to 185 as he hit that terrible stretch. Cabrera still around 240. Swisher with a 122 month of June. And then in the month of July, same thing. Now you've got the one consistent guy, Brantley. Even Chisenhall's cooled off as he's hitting 219 in July. You've got Brantley and Gomes kind of powering things here. And then Bourne, well, he's out now, but his early batting average. And Chisenhall, as we just mentioned, Murphy, these guys bringing it down. Again, it's that you named it perfectly. Inconsistency, the season of it, and that's what you've had. And I'm sure we can make the same arguments just with changing the names about the pitching rotation too. But more than anything, that's it. Because as we've seen, when the guys, especially, that's where you get these games where they're so encouraging. There's games where you watch them and go, this team could beat any team in baseball when they play like this. And then there's games where you watch them and you go, I don't know how they beat anybody.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's the reason. I mean, their season-long inconsistencies is why I think we all feel like we're on a roller coaster, and you feel like they're a day away from pulling it all together, and then in the same breath, you feel like they're a day away from a epic collapse, and you don't really know which way it's going to go. And I hate saying it, but I've said several times, I just think that's what this team is this year, and I think they're destined for 79 to 83 wins at this point, depending on which way the wind blows, and I'm not sure that they have the firepower to move that needle one way or the other enough to make a difference. I mean, I don't know that they have the assets to trade to bring in someone that can get them to a 90-win plateau this year, and I'm not sure that there's one or two players out there that can make that change. I mean, it's easy to fall in love with a guy like David Price, but I mean, let's just play make-believe for a second and just say that they acquire him. Who even cares what they gave up, okay? But say they acquire him. I mean, I'm not sure he's worth 7 wins in 2 months to make that team that much better.
Right, and I agree with you there. We've talked about that, and you've mentioned before, we mentioned how one trade may not be, there's not that savior necessarily. Looking at some of these extremes and the numbers here, man, it's the contrast of two teams. I mean, 46 games, they've scored 3 runs or fewer. In those games, they're 9-37. They destroy pitching in the other games. In the other games, they're averaging 6.6 runs a game. I mean, it's literally such a massive swing between how offensively successful the Indians are when they're consistent. Even just 4 or 5 of the lineup is hitting well at the same time, and then the games where they're not. The games where they're 3 runs or fewer, I mean, they're averaging 1.9 runs a game. I mean, that is an amazing split from 1.9 to 6.6.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, if you're someone who wants to go get a bat to try and change those numbers, I mean, who that is available are you going to get that is going to bridge that gigantic gap? I mean, I don't think that any one player fixes that.
Mike, it's not even getting somebody. I got to tell you, I honestly believe that those numbers that we're throwing out there vindicate the Indians as far as it proves that they're right from the aspect of the pieces are there, because clearly they show that when they're doing what they're doing, even when they're just playing at their average, all of them, they're a good team. They're a good offense. What I'm saying is it shows that the Indians were right to say that we need to get more from what we've got, and that's the biggest difference maker we can make, rather than bringing in a free agent, bringing in a trade. And we're not even talking about the pitching, because that's a different decision. But I think this kind of shows that they're right, because when these guys are playing together and everybody's just doing their part, they're an explosive offense. You can use that when you're talking 6.5 runs a game. I think you can use the term explosive offense, and so I think it shows that they're right, but the consistency is not there. And the opposite side of that is when it doesn't show up and they're less than 2 runs a game.
Yeah, I mean, the optimist in all of us says that it's there, but I mean, you're basically talking about 2 halves of a season. I mean, the one half where they produce runs and the one half where they don't. So,
exactly.
I mean, the opposite side of the coin is, I mean, if you're going to give them the credit for being so good, I mean, you also have to entertain the idea that maybe they're not good. I mean, maybe that's the good, maybe that's the lucky side of the coin, if you will, and maybe they're not as good as what we all think they are. And, you know, I think if you go on an individual basis, you know, I think there are guys who are having good years, and there are a number of guys who are definitely underachieving. I mean, I would agree with you. I would tend to say that, you know, there's enough firepower there to score runs.
I think it's
you know, they just don't do it consistently.
I mean, even the split, though, think about it. 46 games, 3 runs or fewer, but that means that they've scored 4 runs or more in 55 of those games. So it's nearly a 10-game swing there, you know, between the two extremes. So more often than not, they're on the better side of the ledger there, yet still here we sit. And I agree with you, because you're right. I mean, you could look at it the other way, too. I'm balancing that out there to say that's why I think it should skew more towards the plus side of the weight of the ledger, because of the difference there. But still, you're right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you hit 500 for 2 months and 100 for 2 months. At the end of the day, you're 500, and you're in the middle of the pack, and that's where they're at, you know? So however they got there, here we are. And the pitching, let's jump into that too, because that's the other part. I know from the beginning you've been talking about that, but look at some of these numbers. You know, 7 different starting pitchers that have made 9 or more starts, and only 2 that have made more than 14. I mean, 80% of the rotation has turned over from the beginning to now.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a total revolving door. And I mean, if you really think about it, you know, this season opened with the Columbus Clippers' top 3 pitchers being Trevor Bauer, Josh Tomlin, and TJ House. And I mean, they're huge factors on this team now.
Yes.
And I'm not necessarily sure that is a testament to their growth so much as it is a testament to some other people's contraction or setbacks. But, you know, I think, you know, I've talked about this ad nauseum, but I mean, I think if you look at their starting rotation right now and you look ahead, I don't know how you get from where they are to where they want to be. I don't know how you get from 500 to being a playoff contending team with anything close to what they have for a starting rotation. I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than that rotation is a mess. And, you know, we can talk about all the things that they should have done and could have done, but as we sit here on July 24th, 2014, and you look at the rest of this season and you look at next season, that rotation is a mess. And how you fix it to be a contender for this year, but to be a contender for next year, I think there are some very troubling facts in order to fix that rotation that a lot of people probably don't want to admit or don't realize, or both. But I mean, this team we know is on a fixed income, and if they're gonna try to improve their starting rotation, you know, that is the piece in baseball that costs the most. So if you're looking for free agents this winter, you know, there's going to have to be some massive reappropriation of funds on this team. If you're just going to try and land a mediocre starting pitcher, I'm not talking about going out and signing Max Scherzer. I'm not talking about crazy money. I'm talking about, you know, a veteran to try and, you know, stabilize this rotation. You're gonna have to cut some salary in some places that maybe you don't necessarily want to. And I think part of that plays into what they do in the next couple weeks, because I don't know that they can fix all their problems now. And I think they have to look ahead in some ways and say, we've got bigger problems headed our way, and I don't know that they can afford to sacrifice pieces and parts to try and aid a mediocre baseball team.
No, and I do understand where you're coming from, and I know and I'll tell you what, man. I mean, that's where you've got, and these trades, by the way, that's where you've got to weigh what these teams are asking. We've talked about that before, based on what you're going to bring in, and but the thing is the Indians have backed themselves into a corner, and I mean, you can say whatever you want about what they should or shouldn't do, and I understand your thoughts completely. But like, you joke about the unfinished business T-shirts, but at this point, I mean, it becomes very difficult from a PR standpoint for the Indians to do anything but at least give the appearance that they are in this and that they can make a run. And I got to tell you, I mean, I know the problems that the Indians have. Nobody else in contention, and I don't mean the top couple of teams. I mean everybody that's grouped up with the Indians. Nobody's gone out and got it, and nobody's gone out and grabbed it. So other teams' deficiencies are why I keep the Indians in the conversation. Because as long as nobody else is going to reach out and take it, then the Indians still can stumble into it just as much as everybody else can. They are still right in the middle of at least the second playoff, and so from that perspective, I can see that too. But I don't think they can go the way you're saying, is what I'm saying, even if internally they want to, because not only because of this season, but because of the work, as minimal as it may have been paid off so far in the attendance, the work that they've done to rebuild things and to try to get things from where it was at rock bottom at one point. And I think that step backwards, while maybe, like you say, has a lot of things to talk about, I don't see how they can possibly do that. So I do expect them to at least give the appearance of making a move and trying to make something happen this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And as much as I talk about, their glaring flaws moving ahead, I think the biggest thing for me, looking ahead, is if you estimate what some guys will get in arbitration, on paper, the Indians already have $62 million committed in payroll for next year. And if you guesstimate a little bit as to what guys will get in arbitration that you're going to want to have back on this team, you're ballparking this roster for next year at around $75 million already, and that's before you start trying to fix any of the problems. That's where I say I think they have big problems going ahead. But I completely agree with you in that, I mean, you can't be 2 games out of the wild card and say we're punting. That's
right.
Not going to go over in this town, and I don't think it should. And I agree with you. The Indians are trying daily to make goodwill with this town and this fan base, and giving up on a season, I don't think is the way to go when you're 2 games out of a playoff spot either. But for that reason and what they have ahead of them, I just don't see them going out and getting some marquee player that has a salary attached to him for the next year or two. I mean, I guess I look at, in 2011, they went out and made a real, courageous move in trading for Ubaldo Jimenez.
Yep.
I would be blown away if they made some kind of move like that, because I don't think that they can afford it moving ahead. I think if you're making this team better for this year, you're looking for a short-term fix to try and, catch up to those 2 games that they're behind right now. I don't think they're making some major move.
Funny that you say that, because I kind of got the opposite opinion of what you just said. I use that as a comparison, the Ubaldo thing. I think if they do something, that's more along the lines of what they're likely to do, because I just don't see them there. They've never been in the rental business, and so I think they're most likely to not do much of anything. I think sit tight, but
yeah, I agree with you too. I mean, I think a week from now we're going to hear all about how
They almost
it's
did.
A tight
Yeah,
race, how it was difficult to make a trade.
Yes,
and the waiver wire's still there, and they can make moves in August. We're going to hear all of those lines.
But if they make a move, I think it would be more along the lines, because they always talk about we would be willing to take on money if we've got some control. I think a guy with a couple years of control, maybe then, they would be, because I think that's more where they lean.